Today's a rematch. The Pellet Joe and a brisket got off on the wrong foot for my very first cook, but I think I've got it sorted. Let's get started. Hey, I'm James from Smoking Dad Barbecue, and one of the best things you can do when you get a new grill is put it through its paces, do some tests, give yourself information. I preach this in all of my videos. And so naturally, when I received my Kamado Joe Pellet Joe and I wanted to jump straight to a brisket, I followed none of that advice, and I just went straight for the crown jewel of barbecue and did an overnight brisket without any probes, any alarms. And when I got up in the morning, the 911 bell had been ringing for a long time. Now, it's still helpful to go ahead and watch that because there are a few CPR moves where we were able to resuscitate a little bit of life back into that brisket, but it was still destined for chili and nachos versus not being one of my finest brisket efforts. And so what were a few of the key contributing factors? Well, one, it's obvious now, but the temp sensor on the Kamado Joe Pellet Joe is different than the Traeger you've seen in some of my other videos. The Traeger records the temperature at the grid level. The Kamado Joe is recording it at the dome level. Some reason in my excitement to get started, I just assumed it would be the same, and that meant I was getting 20-25 degrees hotter temperatures at the grid level than I thought I had set the grill to. That's mistake number one. Mistake number two is not knowing exactly how it performs. And so one of the things that the Kamado Joe Pellet Joe does is it sort of stokes the fire in order to create some more smoke, but this also increased our average temperature. And the third thing that I learned in that cook is that the distance to the heat source is much different than I'm used to in my Kamado Joe Classic 3 or my Big Joe 3 or the Kettle Joe, where we are sitting right above that ceramic insert. And so I way overdid the bottom. And so I got a few tricks up my sleeve today that I think are gonna give the Pellet Joe a fair crack at turning out a winning brisket. Let me walk you through what we're gonna do different today. So we're doing a couple things different today. We're not doing overnight, we're doing this early in the morning so we can keep an eye on this brisket and our Pellet Joe a little bit closer than what I did the first time I used it, where it was 10, 11 o'clock at night by the time we got our brisket trimmed, threw it on and called it a night. And that was not giving me a chance to intervene if something went off the rails, which it did. And so starting early this morning around 6:30, got up, started trimming up our brisket, just removing any of that excess fat. I've got a couple other videos on how to do that in more detail if you'd like to go ahead and check them out. But today, really just focusing on the differences we're going to apply to this cook versus my first cook and see if those make a great improvement at the end result. I went ahead and seasoned it up with Lane's brisket and ancho for some seasoning, and I am still sticking with my fat cap up. And let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a bit of a head-to-head fat cap up versus fat cap down. I've been doing fat cap down for 10 or so years, but it was just missing something for me that you get when you go to a great barbecue joint and you've got that nice rendered fat cap. And I have reason to be optimistic because the overnight brisket I did on my Kettle Joe, I did this way, and it was fantastic, and it brought back to a Kamado grill something that I've only experienced using an offset before, which is that properly rendered candy type texture that you get when you put your fat cap up down versus just letting it be the waste that falls onto your cutting board when it's time to do your slices. And so I did leave this unattended. This morning I wanted to go for a mountain bike ride. So we got this on just between 7, 8 o'clock this morning, and I set the temperature as low as I can on the dial. So this is 200 degrees Fahrenheit. I also tweaked how I put the brisket on the grill. So I went sort of from left to right instead of north-south, which I think might have been blocking the ambient temperature sensor and also caused the grill to run a little hot. Sort of mid-bike ride, I stopped and checked from my phone, and it was great to see the Joe was running right along where we left it at 200 degrees Fahrenheit. I also, knowing the bottom overdone issue I used the same trick that I've used on my Kamado Joe Classic to get a larger brisket to fit by draping it over a rib V-rack. And so that is going to provide us a little bit more height and protection from that heat source. And it's also practically going to be what allows us to fit just over 15-pound brisket on our 18-inch grid size. So we left that alone for 4 hours until we were about 155 degrees Fahrenheit internal temperature, and our bark looked great. The next thing I'm going to do, and the first time I'm trying it on the Kamado Joe Pellet Joe, is using the boat method. And so this is something that I used on that Kettle Joe brisket and turned out a real winner, and I'm hoping it has the same success here. But the foil boat method essentially just means protecting the bottom with double wrap foil, wrapping it as tight as you can. So as the brisket pushes out that liquid, it's reserved and helps keep the bottom of your brisket moist and flavorful, but at the same time, it allows us to crank the heat from 200 degrees up to 250 degrees Fahrenheit so we can continue building that bark and rendering the fat cap out on top. And so far, it's looking awesome. So now that our brisket's been on just about 6.5 hours, I'm just keeping a check on those internal temperatures as they work their way up to about that magic number of about 203 degrees Fahrenheit is where I expect this to be probe tender. So I'll rejoin you a little bit later in the afternoon as we get closer to our probe tender mark. I'll show you what that looks like. Then we're going to give this brisket a rest at least 2 hours if we can before dinner. We'll go ahead, slice it up, and do our taste test. So I'll see you a little bit later this afternoon. All right, it looks like brisket. It smells like brisket. I feel infinitely better about this attempt, so I can't wait to cut this open. But before we do, let me just bring you up to speed what you missed. And so this total cook time was just a little bit over 9 hours. And so from where I left you, we left the brisket in our foil boat. I just kept checking our probe temperature until we got about 203 is about the right spot for that probe tenderness. Then, just to preserve some of that jus that was been pushed out, I transferred it to a foil pan and covered that in aluminum foil and let it rest for 2 hours. So that's it, you're all caught up. Let's go ahead and slice this open and see how our Pellet Joe brisket attempt number 2 worked out. All right, we've got our brisket all sliced up, and I am really happy with how that was slicing. So except for like one small, maybe 2-inch piece, there was no problem with that bottom cutting clean. And I just love that tacky feel I'm getting from the fat cap, which tells me we are in for some meat candy to finish our texture. So let's go ahead and see how we did. Let's start with a piece of our flat here. Ooh, it's hot. Let's go ahead and see if we can bend, pull. Ooh, it's too hot. I'm gonna set that down. Let's go ahead and try this. That is much better than our first effort. The tenderness is there. That fat cap caramelization is there. Flavor is still not there for me though, in terms of what I am used to for charcoal and smoke. So we went as low as we could go with some hardwood pellets at 200 degrees Fahrenheit to try and build some smoke. And this still feels a little bit more like a pot roast taste than a brisket in terms of getting that full flavor. Let's go ahead and try the the point and see how that is. I don't know if you can see, but getting the smoke ring on there, that looks good. Let's go ahead and do a bite. So I love the point, even more kind of juice and flavorful beef flavor to it. But just like our flat, it's really well cooked to how a brisket should be. It's just light on flavor. Let me take this inside so it doesn't cool off. We'll do a quick recap. All right, we've got that brisket inside and ready to serve up to the family. I took the opportunity to sample a couple more pieces, and it reminded me of a few things outside of my first impressions. So first, that outer crust is really good. Our Lane's brisket and ancho rub is packing a lot of flavor, and that fat cap up is exactly what I want in terms of getting that candied texture of the fat cap. It's just immediately once you're past that, we go from full flavor to what in contrast feels a little bland. And so this brisket for me does not fall anywhere near the fail category. We got the probe feel that we want. We've got the tenderness that we want. We've proved the foil boat method works just as well here on the Kamado Joe Pellet Joe as it did on the Kettle Joe, where I got the bottom texture that I want, the top texture, and that full flavor. So I think though the issue is we just are short on smoke. And so like some other pellet grills where you want to supplement that with some additional pellets, maybe in a smoker tube, I think the Kamado Joe Pellet Joe shares the same fate here of needing just a little bit more smoke flavor in order to bring the quality of this brisket, which is a high quality brisket, up to kind of Smokin' Dad standards that I'm used to on the Big Joe or the Kamado Joe Classic. Because as soon as we get past that crust, the flavor is just not there for me, and it's pretty stark in terms of, you know, what I'm used to. But I do appreciate the convenience of today's cook where, again, we put it on, we're able to go away, not have to tend to the fire. And so I can definitely see where the Kamado Joe Pellet Joe fits in for some people. But for me, it's not enough to win me over from having fun playing with the fire and getting that full flavor experience. And so for my next cook, I'll see you back over there on either the Classic or the Big Joe. But we absolutely proved in terms of the overall quality and tenderness, the Pellet Joe can turn one out, just needs a little bit more help with smoke. I hope you really enjoyed today's video. If you did, please let YouTube know by smashing that thumbs up button, and let me know by hitting subscribe to catch future videos. Until next time, I'm James from Smokin' Dad Barbecue signing off, and remember, don't be afraid to fire it up.